Anakin Skywalker was the Republic's greatest warrior, a Jedi Knight prophesied to bring balance to the Force. But seduced by the promises of Darth Sidious, he betrayed the Jedi, slaughtering them in their temple and turning against his former master, Obi-Wan Kenobi. Their battle on Mustafar left him broken, his body burned, his limbs severed, his destiny seemingly sealed. Rescued by the Emperor, he was encased in a life-preserving suit, his power restrained by pain and machinery, forever bound to servitude. But what if that was not the end? What if Vader could manipulate the Force to regenerate his lost limbs, to restore himself to the warrior he once was? Vader stood in the dim glow of his meditation chamber, the rhythmic sound of his breathing filling the silence. Each mechanical inhale was a reminder of his weakness, of the fire that had consumed him, of the blade that had severed his limbs, of the master who had left him to die. His body, once powerful, was now confined within the cold embrace of durasteel and servos. Every movement was a struggle, his motion stiff, unnatural, dictated by the limitations of the armor that sustained him. The pain had not faded. It never would. The flames of Mustafar had scarred more than his flesh. They had carved into his very being, burning away the remnants of Anakin Skywalker and leaving only Vader in his place. And yet, within that suffering, he found strength. Each stab of pain, each restriction of his movement, each hiss of his respirator fueled the darkness within him. He clenched his fist, feeling the servos whine under the pressure. Sidious had saved him, but not out of kindness. This suit was a cage, a cruel mockery of the power he once wielded. It was meant to bind him, to keep him subservient. But the Emperor had underestimated him. Vader's rage was endless, his hatred a fire that would never die. He would endure, he would grow stronger, and one day, he would cast aside these chains. Vader sat in the darkness of his chambers, staring at his gloved hand. This was not his hand, it was a machine. Like the rest of him now. His servitude to Palpatine had been for Padme, for the promise of power great enough to save her, but she was gone. Everything he had done, every betrayal, every crime, had led only to loss. And now, he was bound to a master he no longer wished to serve. Yet he could not simply walk away. He knew his limitations, felt them with every step. Palpatine was stronger than him, not because of skill or cunning, but because of raw power. The Emperor had everything, while Vader had lost too much. His greatest limitation was not the suit nor the pain, it was the loss of his limbs. The midichlorians that had once surged through his body had been severed with them. No matter how much he trained, no matter how much he fed on his rage, his potential was capped. He needed to restore himself, not with enhancements, not with upgrades to his armor. He needed his limbs to return, to regrow as they had been, to let the Force flow through him as it once did, but it would not be easy. Palpatine would not allow it. If he learned of Vader's ambition, he would not hesitate to destroy him. The Emperor had chosen this form for his apprentice for a reason. Crippled, dependent, bound by the limitations of his own body, the suit was a leash. If Vader succeeded in regenerating himself, he would no longer be Palpatine's pawn. That alone was enough to make it a death sentence. And even if he could attempt it, there was another problem. The body was not so easily fooled. Cloning a limb, even one genetically identical to his own, would not work. Others had tried, and all had failed. Midichlorians were tied to the Force, and they did not take kindly to artificial replications. Clone tissue was rejected, breaking down over time, decaying under the unnatural strain. Perhaps this was it. Perhaps he was truly trapped in the Emperor's design, his power forever limited by his failures, his destiny no longer his own. Or perhaps there was another way. The steady rhythm of his respirator filled the silence as Vader stood motionless, deep in thought. Not long ago, mere weeks before his downfall, Palpatine had told him a story, one meant to seduce him, to make him embrace the dark side. A story of a Sith Lord who had unlocked the secrets of life itself, Darth Plagueis the Wise. At the time, Vader had been blinded by desperation, consumed by his need to save Padme. But now, in the solitude of his suffering, the story returned to him with new meaning. Plagueis had sought the ultimate power, not just strength in the Force, not just control over others, but dominion over life and death. He had been close, if not successful. And if he had indeed discovered how to manipulate midichlorians, then that was the key, not just to power, but to freedom. Vader clenched his fist. If he could unlock what Plagueis had, he could regenerate. He could break free of the chains that bound him, regrow his limbs, restore the potential he had lost. No longer would he be trapped in this mechanical prison, forever lesser than the warrior he once was. He would be whole again, and when that day came, he would no longer bow to the Emperor. But first, he needed to learn everything there was to know about Darth Plagueis. The Sith Lord's knowledge had been buried, erased by Sidious to ensure that no one else could follow in his footsteps. But Vader knew there were always traces, hidden remnants left behind in the depths of Sith history, holocrons, ancient texts, whispers of those who had once pursued the same forbidden knowledge. He would find them, he would unravel Plagueis' secrets, and in doing so, he would reclaim what had been stolen from him. The search for Plagueis' knowledge led Vader into the deepest shadows of the galaxy, forgotten tombs, lost records, and the whispers of those who dared study what the Sith had buried. It was in this pursuit that he found Dr. Varnus Kren, a rogue scientist whose obsession with midichlorians had made him an outcast. Kren had once been a respected researcher under the Republic, but his experiments had gone too far. He believed midichlorians were not just force conduits, but the very fabric of life itself, capable of being manipulated like any biological function. His work had bordered on heresy, and when the Jedi caught wind of his research, they had shut him down, but Kren had not stopped. In exile, he had continued his studies, pushing into the same dangerous territory that Darth Plagueis had once explored. Vader sought him out, and when they finally met, Kren was not fearful, but intrigued. The Sith Lord before him was a walking paradox, an apex predator, yet restrained by his own flesh. Kren had studied cases of midichlorian degradation in clone tissue before, but never had he encountered a subject like Vader, someone who had lost a significant portion of his original body, yet still held immense power in the Force. Their alliance was formed out of necessity. Kren had knowledge, data, theories, experiments that had never been tested, but he lacked what Vader possessed: the ability to wield the Force itself, to feel the midichlorians in a way no scientist ever could. If the two worked together, combining knowledge with power, they could succeed where others had failed. For Vader, this was no longer just about knowledge. This was his path to freedom. If he could regenerate, if he could restore his body to what it once was, he would no longer be shackled to Palpatine's will. And with each discovery he and Kren made, that possibility became more real. But the deeper they delved, the more dangerous their work became. For if they could find the key to midichlorian manipulation, then so too could Palpatine. And if he discovered their efforts, there would be no mercy. The first experiments were a brutal reminder of the dangers they faced. Vader, despite his mastery of the Force, was still bound by the limits of his own body. Kren had warned him, tampering with midichlorians at this scale was not just risky, it was playing with forces even Plagueis had barely understood. But Vader was unwilling to wait. If this was the key to his regeneration, then he would push forward no matter the cost. The initial procedure was simple in theory, an attempt to stimulate the remaining midichlorians within his body, forcing them to accelerate cellular regeneration. But theory and reality were two different things. The moment they initiated the process, Vader's body convulsed violently, the Force itself recoiling as if rejecting the unnatural manipulation. The pain was unlike anything he had endured before. Not the burning of Mustafar, not the agony of his reconstruction. This was deeper. His very essence felt as if it were being torn apart, as though something within him was resisting, fighting back. Kren tried to stabilize him, injecting chemical compounds designed to enhance cellular repair, but it only made things worse. Vader collapsed, his body seizing, his mind slipping. His connection to the Force wavered, weakening, flickering, as if the very energy that sustained him was being drained away. If he had been any other being, if he did not possess such an intrinsic bond to the dark side, he would have died then and there. But Vader refused to die. Through sheer will, he clung to the Force, feeding on his rage, his hatred, his pain. He had not come this far only to be undone by failure. He reached into the darkness, pulling himself back from the abyss. It took hours before his body stabilized, before he could even rise to his feet. Kren was shaken. He had seen many failures in his experiments, but nothing like this. He suggested they stop, that the risks were too great, that whatever Plagueis had uncovered was not meant to be tampered with. But Vader would not stop. This failure had only confirmed one thing: the path to regeneration was real. It was possible, and if it could nearly kill him, that only meant he was close to something truly powerful. Kren's network of informants stretched across the underworld, a collection of exiled scientists, black market dealers, and those who sought knowledge forbidden by both the Jedi and the Sith. One such informant had just delivered news that could change everything: a lead on an old facility where Darth Plagueis was rumored to have conducted his most secretive research. Vader listened in silence as Kren relayed the details. The facility was deep in the Outer Rim, hidden beneath the surface of a barren, forgotten moon. It had been abandoned for decades, its existence erased from most records. But if the rumors were true, this was where Plagueis had spent years experimenting with midichlorians, refining his theories on life, death, and the Force itself. If any place held the key to Vader's regeneration, it was there.
"We must go,"
Vader said, his voice cold and unwavering. Kren hesitated. The facility's location was remote, its condition unknown. There was no telling what traps or defenses might remain, what remnants of Plagueis' work could still lurk in the ruins. But there was no arguing with Vader's determination. If this place held even the smallest fragment of knowledge, it was worth the risk. Preparations were swift. Vader's personal ship, the Scimitar, would take them there under the cover of secrecy. There could be no Imperial involvement, no trail leading back to them. Palpatine could not know. As the ship lifted off, Vader stood in the cockpit, watching as the stars stretched into hyperspace. His mind was fixed on a single thought. This was more than a search for knowledge. This was the next step in his evolution. He was no longer just seeking freedom from the suit. He was seeking something far greater. If Plagueis had truly uncovered the secrets of midichlorian manipulation, then Vader would take that power for himself, and nothing, not Palpatine, not the failures of the past, would stand in his way. The ship descended onto the barren, forgotten moon, its surface covered in the scars of time. The facility stood before them, rusted and worn, yet still intact, an echo of the past, holding secrets that had long been buried. The moment they stepped inside, the air felt thick, heavy with the residue of experiments conducted long ago. Dr. Kren was in pure awe. His eyes darted across the abandoned chambers, scanning the faded inscriptions, the scattered notes left behind by a mind that had nearly conquered death itself. He muttered in excitement, running his fingers over data slates covered in Sith inscriptions. This was it, the culmination of everything he had spent his life searching for. Plagueis had not just studied midichlorians, he had understood them on a level no one else had. If they could decipher his work, regeneration was not just a possibility, it was inevitable. But before they could go deeper, before they could truly unravel what was left of Plagueis' knowledge, the room trembled. The sound of approaching ships, the low hum of engines breaking through the silence. Vader turned sharply. He was here. The doors to the facility hissed open, and the towering figure of Emperor Palpatine stepped forward, flanked by a contingent of crimson-clad royal guards. The scientist's informant had betrayed them, of course. Palpatine had eyes and ears everywhere, especially in the scientific community. The moment Kren had begun his work with Vader, it had only been a matter of time before it reached the Emperor's attention. Palpatine stepped forward slowly, his golden eyes gleaming with curiosity. His voice was smooth, yet laced with underlying menace.
"Tell me, Lord Vader, why does my apprentice have such an interest in Darth Plagueis?"
Vader remained silent, his breath heavy through the vocoder, but Palpatine already knew. He pieced it together instantly. He had always feared this day would come, the moment Vader would seek to surpass his chains, to reach for power beyond what his master allowed. His amusement quickly turned to contempt.
"You seek to defy me. You wish to rid yourself of the gift I have given you. Foolish. There is no life for you outside of my will."
With a wave of his hand, the royal guard seized Dr. Kren. The scientist struggled, but he was no warrior.
"The scientist still has some use. He will not be wasted."
And then, without warning, lightning erupted from Palpatine's fingertips. The blue tendril struck Vader, consuming him instantly. The chamber was filled with the deafening crackle of raw power. Vader's body convulsed, falling to his knees as the electricity coursed through him. His suit, designed to both sustain and weaken him, turned against him, intensifying the pain, amplifying every burst of agony. The dark side fed on pain, but this was beyond suffering. This was a reminder of who was in control. Vader writhed, his vision flashing red, his respirator malfunctioning with each jolt. He reached out through the Force, but Palpatine only increased the intensity. He wanted Vader to break. Just as the darkness began to consume him, just as the void of death loomed over him once again, the lightning stopped. Vader collapsed, his body smoldering, his breath ragged. Palpatine loomed over him, his expression unreadable.
Let this be your final warning. If you continue down this path, I will not show mercy next time.
Vader's fists clenched, but he said nothing. He had no choice. With a gesture, Palpatine's guards lifted him to his feet, escorting him out like a broken tool that had failed its purpose. As he was led away, he cast one last glance at the facility, the place that had held his one hope, and then with a final command from the Emperor, the facility was demolished. The walls collapsed, the knowledge of Darth Plagueis erased from existence, buried under rubble, ensuring that the secrets Vader had sought would remain forever beyond his grasp. Vader sat alone in the dim confines of his meditation chamber, his body still recovering from the Emperor's punishment. The pain was nothing new. He had endured far worse, but the failure cut deeper than any wound. His one chance to reclaim his power had been destroyed before his very eyes. Palpatine had made his message clear. Any attempt to defy him would end in suffering. For the first time, doubt began to creep into Vader's mind. Perhaps he had been foolish. Perhaps this path had been nothing more than a fantasy, one that had cost him dearly. He had no leads, no facility, no scientist. His one ally was gone, and with him, the knowledge Vader had fought so hard to obtain. He was back at square one, trapped, caged, broken, but then a spark of hope. Through his remaining network of spies and informants, Vader uncovered one final lead, the location of Dr. Kren. The scientist had not been executed, nor had he been discarded. Instead, he had been taken to Mount Tantiss. The name was legendary among those who dabbled in forbidden sciences. Hidden deep within the jagged peaks of the planet Wayland, Mount Tantiss was more than a prison. It was an imperial black site, a vault where Palpatine hoarded his most classified research. Cloning, genetic experiments, dark side artifacts. If the Emperor had deemed Kren's knowledge useful, then it would be there that he was forced to continue his work. Vader's mind sharpened. His failures did not matter now, only the path forward. If Kren was still alive, then his research still existed. The Emperor had erased Plagueis' records, but he would not so easily erase the mind of a scientist who had spent his life chasing the same forbidden knowledge. Mount Tantiss held what he needed. Vader moved like a shadow through the corridors of Mount Tantiss. His breathing, once a constant mechanical rhythm, was now silent, manually deactivated and burst as he crept past patrols. The facility was heavily guarded, its halls crawling with Imperial officers, scientists, and troopers, but none of them would live long enough to sound the alarm. Anyone who saw him died before they could report him. A quick flick of his wrist, a crushed throat, a silent lightsaber strike through the back. The Force guided him, making him a phantom in the Emperor's most secret stronghold. He was beyond caring about the consequences. If this mission ended in his death, so be it. He would rather die chasing power than live as Palpatine's crippled puppet. Then, at last, he found Kren. The scientist was not alone. A team of researchers surrounded him, all engrossed in their work. Midichlorians, genetic regeneration, the very studies Palpatine had once deemed too dangerous to share. But what caught Vader's attention most was the look on Kren's face when he saw him. Not fear, excitement. Lord Vader, you made it! Kren gestured to the data terminals, his voice hurried but filled with hope. We've made incredible progress. Plagueis theories, your idea of regeneration, it can work. It will work, but we don't have much time. They didn't. The longer Vader remained, the greater the risk of discovery. But none of that mattered. Kren turned to him, his expression shifting to one of warning. You understand the risk? He asked. If this fails, it will kill you. Vader did not hesitate. The process was brutal. The pain, immeasurable. Vader felt the Force twisting around him, his body fighting against the unnatural acceleration of its own reconstruction. The dark side fed on his agony, fueled the process, binding flesh and energy together. His limbs regrew, his organs restored. The power of the Force intertwined with Kren's research, and where all others had failed, Vader succeeded. As he rose from the operating table, his fists clenched. His power surged through him like never before. His connection to the Force was stronger, his body whole again, but it would take time for his midichlorian count to fully return to its former levels. But that did not matter. He had done it. He had broken the chains placed upon him. He was no longer a crippled servant bound to a mechanical prison. He was Darth Vader, reborn. Kren, still breathless from witnessing the impossible, turned to Vader with desperation. "We need to leave. You must take me with you. We can refine this. Take it even further." Vader looked at him, expression unreadable. Kren had served his purpose. The knowledge they uncovered could not be allowed to fall into the Emperor's hands. With a single motion, Vader ignited his lightsaber and drove it through the scientist's chest. Kren's eyes widened in shock as he collapsed, his work dying with him. The rest of the researchers panicked, but before they could react, Vader cut them down one by one. He had no need for witnesses. As alarms blared throughout the facility, Vader strode toward the exit. His work here was finished. The future was his to claim. Hey guys, it's Star Wars Kingdom, and this is the end of part 1. I made this video differently versus my typical videos that I make for what ifs. And what I mean by that is I did animations instead of static images to help tell the story. If you guys like this, I could continue to make videos like this. However, the animations are costly and time consuming. So if you guys can help out and support the channel, you could do it for free by hitting that like button, hitting the subscribe, and leave a comment. Also, in regards to this story, if we hit 500 likes on this video, I will get to making part 2. Until then, may the Force be with you always.